I do some consulting work on American
feeling in the room was
You don't ever say to her that
What about the Chautauqua Institute?
Introductory discussion on the ethical
We left.
more of a community.
We're China took back over.
Currently doing in autism.
Cathy Willis Spraetz is the president and CEO of Chimp Haven, the national chimpanzee sanctuary in Keithville, Louisiana. Her background is rooted in human services. For more than 2 decades, Spraetz headed nonprofits focused on people with disabilities and victims of domestic violence. She draws parallels to those she served in the past and the chimpanzees she's now pledged to protect. We'll talk with her about our long history of exploitation of chimpanzees, about major changes in the use of chimpanzees in biomedical research, and about chimp art and surprise births. Here's our conversation with Cathy Willis Spraetz. Cathy Willis Spraetz, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yours is a really interesting story because you spent more than 2 decades involved in human services, working with children with disabilities and with victims of domestic violence. How did you wind up working with our closest living relatives?
Well, it's really kind of interesting. I think that the thing that drew me to Chimp Haven is, first of all, I'm a animal lover and go way back with animals of my own. But I also knew that I could transfer my skills to any other nonprofit organization as long as I believed in the mission and felt like it was a strong mission that I could get behind. When I was thinking about the next thing I wanted to do with my life, I saw this job posting for the president and thought, oh, they're going to want somebody with a primatology background or animal welfare background. And when I opened up the job description, I was like, they want somebody like me, somebody who has nonprofit fundraising, all those kinds of skills that you need to really run a nonprofit organization. And animal welfare was great, but didn't have to be a deal breaker. And I really didn't expect them to call me because my background was so different. And 2 days after that, they did call me and we talked, and then they flew me to Shreveport, where I met with staff and the board of directors. And, I actually thought I wouldn't take the position because I'm an urban girl, grew up in Atlanta, like sidewalks. And
here you are in Keithville, Louisiana.
And here I was in Keithville, Louisiana.
Not even in the city.
In the middle of nowhere. And in fact, I tell people, I tease people all the time saying it looked like Sasquatch lived there because it was just so forested. And I was thinking, I'm just going to go through the motions and be polite, but I don't think this is for me. And when I got out of the car and walked up to the administration building, Henry, who happens to be my favorite chimp, and the reason I came to Chimp Haven, was sitting on the highest perch, which is like a telephone pole sort of, and both feet on this pole, just like the thinker. And I remember just audibly gasping.
You said, my heart just opened in a way that I didn't think possible.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what happens to people when they watch any of the Chimp Haven videos that are online or any of the other sanctuaries for chimpanzees.
That's right. I really did. My heart opened in a way that I never thought it could, and I just knew that this was the right place for me.
Henry's story is probably typical, but absolutely heartbreaking. Henry spent 15 years in a filthy, dirty cage. He started his life as a pet to someone who didn't realize chimpanzees should never be a pet.
That's right. So, when people see chimpanzees, a lot of what the general public sees are babies, either babies on greeting cards, babies in movies, babies in TV commercials, babies in every aspect of where they see it. But because adult chimpanzees are, they say sometimes 7 to 9 times stronger than the average human male.
Even though they may not weigh more. An adult may only be 130 pounds.
But they're very dense. They don't have body fat. They're very muscular, very strong. And so when you see these babies and they look so cute and they're grinning and people think, oh, wow, look at that chimpanzee, he's having a great time. No, that's not true. He's actually fear grimacing because chimpanzees don't smile the way we smile. And so,
but they do smile and they do laugh.
Oh, they do smile and they do laugh. They absolutely do. But, it's just, people think that, oh, we can have this chimp and I can raise this chimp to be my own, but by the time they're 3 years old, they're really strong animals. And it's about that time, between 3 and 5, that pet owners realize they made a mistake.
What they don't also know is how many chimpanzees were probably killed procuring that one baby.
That's exactly right. You know, up until 1975, I believe, the United States was taking baby chimps out of the wild. And the tragedy of that was that they would have to kill at least 6 chimpanzees, adult chimpanzees, to get to that baby. You know,
sometimes even
decimating the groups, you know, in order to get that one chimp. And it really did have an impact on the overall population. Of course, there are other things in the natural habitats in Africa that are decimating their habitats. Of course, you know, forestation,
Hunting.
poaching, bushmeat. The bushmeat trade is incredibly strong in Africa. And so, you know, a chimpanzee is a pretty hot commodity when it comes to procuring its meat and then selling it on the open market.
You dedicate a full page on explaining why humans should not have chimpanzees as pets. Is that message sinking in? And I'm actually kind of shocked that an endangered species could be a pet anyway.
Right. I think that it is. I think we've made some progress. I think people are beginning to understand, although there are a couple of breeders in this country who breed chimpanzees for sale, and people who don't know any better can actually buy a baby chimp. What happens, though, is within 5 years, they realize that that chimpanzee has become way more unruly than they anticipated, much stronger than they are, much more willful, and really a dangerous animal to have in the home. And so it really is important that people understand that chimpanzees are wild, dangerous animals. We never forget that at Chimp Haven.
Retirement for chimpanzees that were used in biomedical research has come in some respects at a glacially slow pace. Chimp Haven was actually established in 1995, but it wasn't until 2005 that you got your first 2 residents, Rita and Teresa.
That's right. So it took the founders a long time, really, to identify a suitable place. They wanted a place that was a mild weather, that would be friendly to chimpanzees, and after many, many years of searching, the Caddo Parish in Keithville, Louisiana, actually gifted Chimp Haven with 200 acres of pristine forest, a perfect place for a sanctuary with plenty of elm trees and yaupon holly trees, and the chimpanzees love both of those, that vegetation, and so it was really quite perfect for them.
And we wouldn't even be talking about this if it were not for the Chimp Act, which Bill Clinton signed into law and was a result of the Institutes of Medicine and NIH saying, should we be doing this? Should
Actually,
we be using animals?
the 2000 Chimp Act came before that.
Okay.
It came for long before, actually, NIH started looking at it, or, you know, there was mounting pressure to the government to end biomedical research for chimpanzees. But in 2000, after a lot of advocacy work on the part of those organizations and individuals that really cared about chimpanzees, that's when the Chimp Act was passed into law, because chimpanzees were being used in research all, you know, just full tilt in that time period. However, when a chimpanzee was done in research, they stayed in the lab. They wouldn't be used in research, but they just stayed there.
Often.
Maybe in isolation, maybe in a small group, but still they were in a contained space. And so it was those chimpanzees that the founders of Chimp Haven were really looking at, not knowing when chimps research might end. And so in 2005, we had our first 2 chimpanzees, Rita and Teresa. And then after that, they began to trickle in, and some in great numbers. But it wasn't until June of 2013 that they actually retired chimpanzees, federally owned chimpanzees from research.
The director of NIH, Dr. Francis Collins, actually said, Americans have benefited greatly from the chimpanzee's service to biomedical research, but new scientific methods and technologies have rendered their use in research largely unnecessary.
That's right.
And that makes me ask, because so often they were infected with hepatitis and with HIV, and I wonder if they were even very good test subjects for that, knowing that I think only one or rarely did HIV turn into full-blown AIDS among chimpanzees.
That's right. So they really were a poor research model, particularly for HIV and AIDS research and Hep C. We still don't have a vaccine for Hep C. And so, I think that, people can argue one way or the other. Some people can argue that they were probably never great models for any of the research. If you want to cure human disease, you mostly have to use human subjects.
With consent?
With consent, of course. But there are technologies in place that allow for researchers to do a great deal of their work without using animals as a model.
Now, 75% of the care and upkeep of these chimpanzees that have come from biomedical research, from federal programs, is paid for by NIH. How do you pay for or fund the rest of the chimpanzees that are in your care, including those who were in the entertainment industry, or like Henry, who was an abused pet?
Right. Well, the Chimp Act not only paved the way for the federal sanctuary to be created, it also gave the government a financial incentive for retiring them, because people wanted them retired, but they just stayed in the labs. And so
for decades often.
Absolutely. And so the federal government realized that if they changed the cost sharing so that it was not 100%, but 75-25, then that would be a much better deal for them. Would save the taxpayers money. And so the rest of the funding comes from the typical places that nonprofit organizations receive money. We have some incredibly generous individual donors.
Bob Barker,
Bob Barker is one, yes, I can name others. So we have a very generous group of donors who really care about this issue. And of course we get grants and foundations and those other typical sources of support.
One of the interesting stories about Chimp Haven is that these primates, these great apes, are coming to Chimp Haven for retirement. And yet a number of chimpanzees have actually been born there, accidentally, I should say, because the chimpanzee that's fathered at least 3 of these chimpanzees was underwent a vasectomy that was unsuccessful. And again, it leads me to say, we are very similar to chimpanzees, but also different.
That's right. So we definitely are, and I think that difference that you talk about is the thing that separates us from chimps and humans, is that there are those subtle differences. We have 98.7% same DNA, but that other little less than a percent difference does make a difference. So chimpanzees, vasectomies would regrow at an incredibly fast rate, I might add. And chimpanzees heal better than humans and much faster. So there are some differences that make chimpanzees unique. But we've only had 3 oops babies.
And they're all
and we
adorable.
Hope there are no more, and they are adorable.
One of the things that I've been struck by when I look at the work in terms of sanctuary for chimpanzees is that it's women doing this work. From Jane Goodall to Diane Fossey with gorillas, to all of the women like you who are involved in this at Fauna Foundation, to Save the Chimps, to Chimps Inc. It's all women.
Well, if you look across the board, I mean, we are typically the caregivers, the caring sex, and I think that it's kind of a natural thing for women who just have this nurturing instinct to want to care for the least of these. There are certainly men in the field that do great work, but yes, it is largely dominated by women.
You know, if we look at a human who's been imprisoned for decades, their adjustment back into normal society can be very, very difficult. What is it like for these chimpanzees who may have spent 20 or 30 years and have been ill in some cases when they come to you?
Well, you know, every chimpanzee is unique. And so, just like humans, they're extremely resilient like we are. So many of us are able to overcome some of the difficulties and traumas that we've experienced in our lives. Same goes with the chimps. Some of them are traumatized by spending decades in small locations, small spaces that are mostly mesh and concrete. And we refer to those chimpanzees as wall walkers. When they come out into the open air space or in the habitats, they very often will just hover near the concrete walls or the mesh because that's what they're used to, that's what they're comfortable with. However, we have seen chimps go from that to actually walking across the play yard or actually using the habitat. Sometimes it takes years and years for that to happen, but we never give up on them.
In fact, you have a video of one chimpanzee who's hanging on to a chain link fence and occasionally letting a foot just brush on the grass.
Yes.
It must be absolutely heart-wrenching in some ways to watch this. Not what you're doing, but just to see how they're coming back to life in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, Chimp Haven, to them, I guess this is Chimp Heaven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we kind of like that. That has a certain ring to it. Yeah, you know, I think the real difference in sanctuary is that the chimps have self-determination. They can make choices of who they want to be with, whether they want to sleep inside or whether they sleep outside. The only time we lock them out of their indoor areas is when we're cleaning them, and typically they will shift out into the outdoors because they like it outside. That gives us an opportunity to clean their spaces. But other than that, if they want to sleep in the habitat, they have the freedom to do that. We don't, when we see them in the habitat, we don't call their names or call them to us because what we want is for them to remember how it feels to be a chimp. And so we want them to connect to each other rather than to us.
The animals at Chimp Haven can't be reintroduced into the wild. Why not?
Well, the fact is they don't remember being in the wild. If they were wild-born chimps, they were taken out of the wild when they were infants. And so there's a hierarchical structure. There's a process that the chimps in a group understand, a political grouping, if you will. And so chimpanzees in captivity would be considered outliers. You know, the other chimpanzees would probably not accept them and actually would try to kill them, if not kill them. And then there are natural predators for chimpanzees in the wild that these captive chimps have never experienced and would not know.
They wouldn't survive it.
Right, they would not survive it.
You mentioned names, and I think it was Jane Goodall who first started naming chimpanzees.
And she got a lot of criticism
slack
for that.
But I noticed that so many of the chimpanzees that have made it to Chimp Haven actually have numbers tattooed on their chests. So I'm kind of curious about the whole naming thing, why you do it, and who comes up with the names.
Well, actually, even though the ID number of the chimpanzees was tattooed on the chimpanzee, just to make sure they knew which chimp they were using, they did name the chimps in the labs. And so the only babies that we've named are the ones that were born at Chimp Haven. And occasionally we will come up with a middle name because we may have a chimp that's coming to us from a lab whose name is the same as another chimp that's in. So Queenie is a perfect example. And our staff then have a contest and select the middle name for that chimp. And so we now have a Queenie and a Queenie Latifah after Queen Latifah. So we have a lot of fun doing that.
You know, one of the things you do for stimulation, because what they lost in captivity was any normal stimulation, and so you are giving them as much of that as possible. Part of it, surprisingly, is a chance to create artwork, which kind of has a dual purpose.
Not all the chimps like to paint, but we certainly give them the opportunity if they want to. So we offer enrichment, novel enrichment, 7 days a week.
This is a real retirement home.
Right. 4 out of 7 of those days, it's food-based enrichment. So it's typically a novel fruit or food that they have to really work at to get. So it encourages that foraging behavior that's typical for a chimpanzee. It also keeps their mind sharp. And so anything that we can do to try to enhance their environment, and painting goes along with that. Not all the chimps like to paint, but some of them are very, very good at it. We have some beautiful artwork. Which
actually serves as a fundraising tool
Yes.
as well. So
Yes.
some of these pieces of artwork
That's
are
right.
available for sale. And some chimpanzees, I understand, paint with a paintbrush, and there's one that paints with his tongue.
Right. Brent, actually, what a great favorite of Chimp Haven staff. Brent recently passed away, but he was a prolific artist, and he had the unorthodox approach to painting where he would use his tongue. So he would put the paint on the canvas and then lick it. And so you had all these tongue prints, but it turned out to be a really beautiful piece of art. And then we have Les, who refuses to use a paintbrush, and he prefers a feather duster. So it gives a lot of ethereal look to the art that Les does.
Well, this makes me kind of realize just how different their personalities are. Another thing that makes them seem close to us.
Right, right. I mean, I think people see chimpanzees and they think, oh, they all look alike. But when you really look closer, and you can see a number of chimpanzee photographs on our website, you'll see how different they are. They all look different, they all act different, they have different temperaments. And I will add that, the naming is really important for us. Our care staff, our animal care staff, including our behaviors, have to know and be able to identify every chimpanzee at Chimp Haven. We have 205 chimpanzees, and they can pick them out.
Well, speaking of looks, when they came to you, many of them were flaccid, they didn't have much hair, they had skin problems, and the difference before and after is absolutely amazing.
Well, I think that the combination of really excellent care, and that's not to say they didn't get excellent care in the labs, because in most cases they actually did. But they didn't have as much space to move around in and as much access to the outdoors as they do at Chimp Haven. Chimpanzees actually can sunburn. In the summer they get really, really dark, and just being out and getting fresh air and having really good food and lots of vegetables and fruits available to them, they just really begin to look better.
Well, when you say that many of them came from situations they were well cared for, most of them are in university settings. But according to Jane Goodall and others, all research facilities are not alike. Some, in her description, are absolutely horrendous in terms of the size of the space and the fact that these very social primates are isolated. And as you're seeing in Chimp Haven, these are very social animals.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's tough because when an animal is in a research protocol, very often they're singly housed because they're doing research. And so having other variables in the environment really changes the landscape. But it is a very sad existence for a chimpanzee to live by themselves. They are very social animals. They live in very large social groups in the wild, sometimes as many as 100 chimpanzees in a group. So it's really gratifying to us to get those chimps at Chimp Haven into large social groups.
Well, interestingly, your favorite chimpanzee, Henry, who lived 15 years in a dark, dank garage in his own filth, came out and he wasn't well socialized, but according to Chimp Haven, he's now really the alpha male.
Yeah, he is.
So he's come a long way.
He has. Now, he probably wouldn't be the alpha male in a different group, but in this particular group, he is, and they let him do that, without any problem. When Henry first came, he didn't know how to be submissive, and that's something they learn from birth. They learn the pecking order and the hierarchy, and there's a very complicated hierarchy in chimp social groups, and it changes, particularly if there are more than one dominant male, and they're always vying and jockeying for that position. So to see Henry go from being totally inappropriate in a social setting as far as chimps are concerned, to becoming the alpha male is really quite a testimony to just how smart they are and how much they can learn.
You know, you're not open to the public like a zoo, but you do engage the public, and education is an important part of what you do. What do you want Americans most to know about the chimpanzees you're caring for?
Well, I think it's really important for people to support what we do. Captive chimps live a long time. We have our oldest chimpanzee is 61, and she shows no signs of going anywhere anytime soon. And so they can live, up well into their 60s. And it's really important, I think, for people to know that they did contribute a lot to science.
Beginning with the space program.
Absolutely. And they, we always say, oh, they gave so much, but we have to remember they gave that unwillingly. And so we owe them. I really do think we owe them, and providing the sanctuary for them is the very best that we can do.
All right. Thank you so much. Cathy Willis Spraetz, thanks for being with us.
Thanks. It was a great pleasure to be here.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Cathy Willis Spraetz. Comcast subscribers can watch this program anytime on Penn State On Demand. Find out how through our website, conversations.psu.edu, where you'll also find more information on Chimp Haven. I'm Patty Satalia. We hope you'll join us for our next Conversation from Penn State.
Production funding provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you. This has been a production of WPSU.